Okay, you're live.
Thank you very much. This is the EOTC meeting, Elected Officials Transportation Committee meeting for Thursday, October 29. Just a quick note to the participants and electeds that are on this. I do have the virtual hand raising ability, so if you don't mind, try to use that as much as possible. I can't always see everybody, so if you have questions or comments and input, then please just use the virtual hand raising. I can see that. I've also been asked to remind you to please mute yourself if you are not speaking. And with that, it is a call to order, and we do have all three jurisdictions with quorum representation. So we'll go ahead and get started, and the first item here is for public comment. So I'm going to go ahead and ask if there are any members of the public that wish to speak tonight. You can unmute yourself if you can and introduce yourself, members of the public. Hearing none, we'll go ahead and move forward on our agenda. This is EOTC committee member updates. Are there any committee member updates that need to be shared at the beginning of the meeting? We're way ahead of schedule, guys. Already. Let's go ahead and get to it then. Dave is with us, and we're going to be talking about the 2021 EOTC proposed budget. David?
Yes, thank you, Tori. I am Dave Pesenchuk, Regional Transportation Administrator for the Elected Officials Transportation Committee. First off, I was sharing my screen earlier. I don't know if I am anymore. What are you guys seeing on your end?
I have a grid view of all participants right now.
Okay, let me try sharing my screen again here. You guys able to see my PowerPoint presentation now?
Yep, that is up.
All right. And you're seeing the full screen, not the other screens that come up.
Correct. This is full screen for us.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you, Mayor. So before we get into the agenda, I did want to remind everybody about the EOTC vision, mission statement, and state statute and voter requirements. The EOTC does have a mission that states that we envision the Roaring Fork Valley as the embodiment of a sustainable transportation system, emphasizing mass transit and mobility that contributes to the happiness and well-being of residents and visitors. We also have a mission statement that states that we will work collectively to reduce and manage the volume of vehicles on the road and parking system and continue to develop and support a comprehensive multimodal long-range strategy that will ensure a convenient, equitable, and efficient transportation system for the Roaring Fork Valley. Our efforts are also guided by state statute and need to stay within the bounds of state statute and voter requirements. And those are essentially that the EOTC funds must be utilized for financing, constructing, operating, and managing the mass transportation system within the Roaring Fork Valley. So as Tori mentioned, started walking through the agenda. So we covered public comment and EOTC committee member updates. We are currently ahead of schedule. And we've got two action items coming up today. The first one is approval of the 2021 EOTC budget, and the second one is approval of the 2021 EOTC work plan. Starting off with the budget, and before I get into the budget itself, I did want to hit on more or less the 30,000-foot view and the development goals for both the work plan and the budget itself. So these stem from the retreat that we went through last year, with the first order of work being to update the EOTC internal items and really trying to keep the internal or get the internal house in order, quote unquote. And so in order to do that, the first two items were developing the strategic plan and updating CGTV, which we did in 2020. And then moving forward into 2021.
I'm going to give you this.
Hey, real quick, sorry, David.
Yeah.
Oh, there it goes. Okay, it's muted now. Thank you.
Okay. And then moving into 2021, the primary goal in terms of getting the EOTC house in order is updating the IGA that was last adopted in 1993 and having it consider the updated CGTV and clarifying the decision-making process within the EOTC itself. Simultaneously, we've been working on both the EOTC side and the staff side to complete and support the current projects and efforts. So this includes projects that you're all aware of, including the Brush Creek Park and Ride, flap improvements, the dynamic message sign, and the Town of Snowmass Village Transit Center. So all of those have been continuing forward. And then looking down the line, as these projects start to wrap up, which is at least on the EOTC end, looking to wrap up about 2022, doesn't mean that they're going to be, especially the transit center wouldn't be constructed by that date. The next goal is to start to prepare for upcoming short and midterm efforts. So that's looking really 1 to 5 years out. And the goal there is to gather the necessary information and start prioritizing those short and midterm efforts. So the studies that you see in the budget and work plan are anticipated to work towards that more or less short-term effort, but inevitably we're going to have some long-term items come from that. And so that brings us to the next step. So the next steps looking 2022 and beyond is really trying to implement that short to midterm efforts and really trying to implement that in more of a capital programming type of way for the next 1 to 5 years, so that we on the staff side and the EOTC side can continue to implement those efforts while we have more long-range planning discussions. And I think some of those more long-range planning discussions are things that we're familiar with, and then there's some that might come up and have already come up out of the short to midterm efforts. So that includes obvious things like the discussions around the entrance to Aspen Record of Decision and how that fits into long-range planning, as well as do we want to be looking at alternative technology modes moving forward, and how does that fit in? And from the conversations that we've had leading up to this point, in terms of preparing for the next 1 to 5 years, we did have the IMS report out. And one of the items that you might recall from that was the discussion on congestion pricing. And that from that discussion was really identified as more of a long-term 11-plus year item because of its complexity. But the next steps looking 2022 and beyond is trying to develop a plan for where all of those fit and how we should begin to tackle those while simultaneously working through a 1 to 5 year capital improvements program. Diving then into the budget with that context, we do have 3 main points. You did see these as a part of your prep meetings also, but I wanted to highlight them here again. Is that in 2019 and 2020, these have been particularly turbulent financial years for the EOTC, as it has for all public jurisdictions. And this has been not only because of COVID-19, which has impacted everybody, but also House Bill 19-1240, which is the Wayfair v. South Dakota decision, and that prompted the state of Colorado to implement rules that changed how use tax and sales tax are collected and essentially shifted a lot of use taxes over to sales tax. And as a result of this, it's been difficult to parse out exactly what the impacts from House Bill 19-1240 have been versus COVID impacts. And there's been a lot of uncertainty moving through this budget cycle. And that brings me to the next bullet, which is that there's still a lot of question marks moving forward in terms of what this winter season and next spring season will look like and what that'll mean for ongoing revenues. So what I'm hearing from the county finance department is that we might be looking at some late adjustments to revenue projections. And while this is a possibility in any given year, I think that the likelihood is higher this year than in most years. But that brings me to my third bullet point here, is that for 2021 through 2025, it does appear as though the EOTC will be able to meet its current ongoing operation costs, its currently obligated projects, as well as its new and increased project requests. And a lot of that, the EOTC's ability to do that is because 2019 was an unusually and unpredictably strong year financially in terms of sales, particularly sales tax revenue. And then looking at the revenue side itself for the EOTC has three main revenue sources: sales tax, use tax, and investment earnings. So those are the top three lines here, the three unbolded lines. And to walk you through these one by one a little bit, so sales tax was fairly steady between 2017 2018, rose about 5.8%, but shot up 22.2% in 2019 before projected to come down 7.9% in 2020. The increase in 2020 or in 2019 at 22% was both a combination of 2019 being a particularly strong year financially, and House Bill 19-1240 shifted some of those use tax revenues into the sales tax category. So looking at 2020 in particular, sales tax revenue, if you may recall, at March of this year, we were looking at being down about 19%, is what I was hearing from the county projection. So being down 7.9% really isn't all that terrible, all things considered at this point. But we are expecting that sales tax will level off here in 2021 and into 2022. And then use tax is a notably volatile tax. I think that sales tax is volatile as well, but use tax is even more so. With use tax, it did go down slightly in between 2017 and 2018 before rising in 2019. I would point out that the rise in 2019 was unexpected with use tax, given the House bill impacts. But looking back in time, what we saw was some large construction projects that came in early 2019 that paid estimated use tax up front, and then are now getting reimbursed for those use taxes in 2020. So that the decrease of 73% that you see in 2020, that is actually an decrease from that being down 63% was the projection moving into this year. So part of that is those refunds going out in 2020, and those are on the scale of about $200,000 in revenues or in refunds going back out for those use taxes. Moving between 2020 and 2022, the use taxes that we receive on the EOTC end will be primarily from motor vehicle sales tax. So the House bill didn't impact the use tax that's levied on motor vehicles. So essentially what we're seeing shift is construction use tax over to sales tax while we'll maintain revenues from motor vehicles. And then total investment earnings, this doesn't represent a whole lot of actual dollars into the EOTC, but it does, we did quite well in 2018, 2019 in terms of actual dollars received. This isn't investment interest rates. These would be very amazing interest rates. But in 2020 and 2021, those are expected to go down. Interest rates are expected to go down. And in addition, on the EOTC side, this is based on our overall fund balance that's invested. And so as we expend funds for projects, we would expect to see less revenue coming back in terms of investment income simply because we have less revenue in our fund. But EOTC overall, up again, 2019 about 19.5%, then down 41.4%. Because of the bump in 2019, overall we're looking at a decrease of about 20%, which is again not as bad as originally estimated earlier this year. And then another small decrease, about 9.4%, relatively small decrease of 9.4% in 2021 before overall revenue is expected to stabilize. I did want to show you the annual revenues for the EOTC with all of this fluctuation. In 2017, 2018, we had about $2.7 million annually coming in. It jumped to $3.25 million in 2019. And we're looking at that decreasing to about $1.9 million in 2020 and then leveling off in more the $1.7, $1.8 million annual revenue range. And then this last line here, we'll talk about later in the presentation, but this is the unobligated fund balance. So in a given year, how much of the overall fund is not either allocated to that that year's operational funds or that year's and future project funds. So it's not otherwise obligated to a project or current operation. So in 2020, we're looking at about $916,000 in unobligated funds, and that's looking to grow to about $1.27 million in 2020 and about $1.7 million by 2022. And then this graph here shows should look familiar to you from the prep meetings. Just to show you this once more, I'll go through it pretty quickly. Is the red line shows the EOTC overall revenue, so you can see the jump in 2019 and dip in 2020. What I really wanted to point out here was the flip in sales and use tax as being the primary revenue source for the EOTC. So up through 2019, we saw use tax being the primary revenue source. We're looking at, as that shifts to being primarily motor vehicle use tax in 2020 and beyond, that's looking to stabilize at about $250,000 to $350,000 annually, with sales tax becoming the primary revenue driver for the EOTC. And then the sales tax, the 0.5% sales tax is split between RAFTA, which is the dotted block line at the top. They receive about $4.5 to $5.5 million in revenue from that 0.5% sales tax, 81% of that. EOTC retains 19%. So to see the 100% of sales tax, that's the light blue line, and the dotted black line, if you put those together, that's all of the sales tax that's collected. And then investment income is down at the bottom in the purple line. As you can see, it doesn't represent a large portion, but it is still notable as part of the EOTC revenue. So moving then into the expense side, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but did receive some questions in the prep meetings in terms of ongoing and operational expenses, so I wanted to touch on these. If you are looking at your budget, this follows along with the same headings and order as they appear in the budget itself. So start off with the use tax collection and county overhead. This is divided between county departments as the county collects the sales and use tax fees. There's a burden then on certain county departments for the collection and auditing of those taxes, as well as county overhead for the regional transportation administrator position. So this includes overhead from finance, obviously, for the collection and auditing of the taxes, as well as HR for the regional transportation administrator position and payroll, and those types of overhead items. It also includes insurance for the risk insurance for the EOTC and the sales and use tax fund. I did want to point out here as well that this also includes overhead for EOTC projects. So when the EOTC embarks on a project that, say, brings in public works or engineering staff, that is also billed back to the EOTC under this line item. So I think a good example of this is the dynamic message sign that went through, that is currently, I believe it is being installed currently, with the sign being installed the first part of next week. The project engineering and construction engineering we did in-house with the county, so that was billed back through this line item. And that was done for cost savings as opposed to sending it out to a private consultant, SGM or one of those. So that is all grouped in here as a part of this $177,000. This is also billed 1 year in arrears. So this is the 2020 estimated cost to the EOTC for those items. And then moving on to administrative and meeting costs, this line item staying the same from 2020 at $12,400. I expect in 2020 it'll be significantly lower than budget. I expect it'll be significantly lower than budget in 2021 as well, mostly because we're having meetings like this, so we're not purchasing food. We don't have that overhead. And in terms of, it does include employee costs like my computer, cell phone plan, as well as training and travel for the regional transportation administrator position. And as you know, in 2020, there was virtually none of that. So, and I anticipate at least for the first part of 2021, that's also going to be significantly lower. So I do anticipate this coming in much lower than budget in both 2020 and 2021. The rest, Aspen Country Inn Taxi and Lieu program, we have seen increased interest in this, so this is jumping from $4,000 to $7,000, not a big line item, but we are still seeing interest in that program. And then the Brush Creek Park and Ride operating costs, this is only increasing by the CPI, so from $42,000 up to $42,882. I would note that as we develop out the park and ride and we do start maintaining water systems and septic systems and the restrooms, that we are looking at this this line item possibly doubling in order to maintain those facilities. That's looking to not occur this year, probably in 21 or 22, 22 or 23. And then we've got the No Fare Aspen Snowmass Woody Creek service. This is billed 2 years in arrears, so this is based on 2019 actuals from RAFTA at 36.7% of their actual cost to run those lines. And that 36.7% is estimated on their fare lost in order to, so the subsidy from the EOTC is covering that fare lost is basically what that's getting at. And then the Regional Transportation Administrator is the last item on here, 141,189. There is a small increase here. We're not seeing an increase in salaries on the county side, so that is staying the same. But there are some changes in terms of county benefits, health insurance, wellness, retirement, that kind of thing, that we'll see a small increase in this line item from 2020, but it's predominantly unchanged. And then moving on to renewals, one-time increases, and new requests. This is the same slide that you saw in the prep meetings, and I'll go into each of these in more detail, but wanted to give you an overview of what we have out there. So we've got the two new renewals from WeCycle and X Games that I believe you're all familiar with. We also have two one-time increases in funding for the Snowmass Mall Transit Center and the Brush Creek Park and Ride Flap Grant Match. And then we have four new requests, one for the IMS Phase 2, the Upper Valley Transit Enhancement Study, the Bicycle and Pedestrian Connection to the Brush Creek Park and Ride Feasibility Study, and the Aerial Connection Feasibility. Now, I've got an asterisk here again because staff is currently not recommending expenditure of funds on the Aerial Connection Feasibility Study at this time, but because it was a finance or a funding request, it is still included in these items. So to start off with the renewals fairly quickly, the WeCycle operational support, this is a request for $100,000 operational support for 1 year. This is in line with historical support for WeCycle. I would note that this is WeCycle is currently in discussions with RAFTA to determine their future relationship. So the 1 year renewal made sense both to WeCycle from that perspective and to staff from just the turbulent finances perspective and just doing a 1 year renewal of that operational support. Then the X Games bus subsidy, this came in again at $115,000 for a 1 year renewal again. This is again in line with same historical support for X Games bus subsidy. And part of I think it's important to point out with the context of COVID that this is a reimbursement subsidy. So should X Games occur with no spectators and require no bus operations, or occur on a smaller scale, then this would be billed on that pro rata version of that occurrence. So I think it's safe to look at this as, from the EOTC perspective, as being a not to exceed $150,000 and a reimbursement. So we're not in the position of determining here whether, what X Games looks like this year, but simply planning and saying if it does occur and public health allows it and X Games and everything goes forward, then we're prepared moving into 2021 with that bus subsidy. And then moving then on to one-time increases in funding. So we've got two of these, the Snowmass Mall Transit Center and Brush Creek Park and Ride. So starting off with the Snowmass Mall Transit Center, this is an overall line item of $6 million for a 2022 request. The overall construction cost and project cost is $12 million. So this is looking to be about 50% of the overall project cost. The background on this, I think, is important to keep in mind that this is there is a minimum ballot obligation in 22. There's a balance of that obligation of $5,278,787. This balance is identified in the budget, So this was a 2,000 voter obligation for the town of Snowmass Village. You'll also notice in the budget in 2000 and 2001 that we do have funds obligated for final design. Those have been subtracted out of that overall $7 million obligation in 2000 and is taken into account as a part of the $5,278,787. So the overall requested increase is $721,213. So that's a very exact number, simply getting the ballot obligation minimum balance up to $6 million and 50% of that construction cost. But I did want to emphasize that this is anticipated to be used for construction it's currently anticipated beginning in 2022. And the reasoning behind this is that there's a lot of shifting state and federal grant availability, particularly with COVID right now, and getting the match up to 50% really increases the chances of funding and keeping this project moving forward through this kind of shifting grant availability times. I also wanted to point out that as a part of the staff scoring of expenditures, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, and we talked about it a little bit in the prep meetings too, to back up, the staff scored each of the expenditures as in terms of how well they met the strategic plan and CVTP. This project did score as one of the top 3 priority projects that were able to best meet the strategic plan and CVTP. So at the bottom here, I did want to point out the line item. So we have the 2,000 ballot requirement for funding of $7 million and the 2022 balance of $5,278,787 with that overall expenditure line at $6 million in 2022. Oops, sorry, wrong way. And then moving on to the Brush Creek Park and Ride flap grant match. This is a total line item of $3,493,622 for an overall $6.9 million project. So this is to bring you back in time a little bit. In 2020, the EOTC had obligated $2 million for this match. So this is a requested increase of $1,493,622. So other funding sources that we have with this increase or for this project is Federal Highways Administration flap funding at $2.4 million, as well as CMAQ funding at $1 million. So that's how we get up to the $6.9 million. The increased match grant for the EOTC does consider construction in 2022. So it considers that construction escalator as if it's being constructed in 2022. That was important. I didn't want to have to come back and increase funding again from the EOTC with construction in 2022 and having to add those funds in. I want to take the conservative approach and have this really ready to go with the maximum funds available to keep it moving. It also does not consider a $500,000 contribution from RAFTA, and that wasn't included in here because that's still pending RAFTA board approval. So should the RAFTA board approve this funding request, that amount would be subtracted off of the EOTC obligation for this project. So again, the $3.493 million is the highest, hopefully, that we would see on this project. Again, this is a conservative approach, so hopefully we won't have to add funds later, but it also allows us to move forward with the project as soon as possible. And through the design process, that was something heard over and over again from the EOTC, as we wanted this to move forward as soon as we had all the funding lined up. I would add that with my conversations with the Federal Highways Administration over the last couple of days, it does not sound like we're looking at a 2021 construction. It doesn't look like they'll have their match ready in 2021. So it sounds as though their match would be ready in August 2021, which would gear us up for a 2022 construction. I would still With this being a 2021 obligation in the EOTC budget, I would encourage it to stay as a 2021 obligation. The reasoning for that is that we are still moving through and getting invoices from Federal Highways for design. This allows us to pay those invoices for design, and then at the point where we get to reviewing the 2022 budget, we can simply forward the balance in order to keep this project moving. So those are the two new or one-time increases in requests. The next 4 items are new requests. So the first one of those, we have the IMS Phase 2. This is a continuation of the Phase 1 in 2020. The ask from the EOTC is $25,000. The total project is $65,000. So we have two other funding sources for this Phase 2 version of or analysis of the study. We have $30,000 from CDOT in terms of a multimodal options fund grant. We also have a $10,000 commitment from RAFTA to pursue the Phase 2. So that's so the remainder ask from the EOTC is for $25,000. This is, again, a continuation of the IMS Phase 1 that was started in 2020. And again, this was developed by the Community Task Force on Transportation Mobility in 2016 and 2017. The Phase 1, as you'll recall, was reported out in September 2020. In terms of scope for Phase 2 and a reminder of scope on Phase 1, Phase 1 did look at refinement of strategies, a high-level analysis of vehicle miles traveled, greenhouse gas emissions, and single-occupant vehicle impacts. And number 3, it did also identify a draft implementation framework. So the items that are to be tackled as a part of the Phase 2 analysis include a more detailed greenhouse gas emissions and travel analysis, really looking at which of those trips are to be would be most impacted, a performance measures and evaluation framework, socioeconomic and equity impact analysis, impacts from autonomous vehicles, and then we also added in a projected mid and long-term travel impacts from COVID-19. So as this all got going, as you know, the IMS was developed pre-COVID-19. We also did Phase 1 pre-COVID-19. Now that we have this in place, I think it's important that we do look at COVID-19 and how it might impact the rollout of each of these items. And as a reminder, the IMS consists of the Phase BRT enhancement, ride-hailing, ride-sharing, HOV lane enforcement, and congestion reduction measures. And then next up, the second one on the list is the Upper Valley Transit Enhancement Study. So this is a $45,000 ask from the EOTC for a $100,000 project. In terms of other funding partners, we have CDOT at $50,000 from a multimodal options fund grant and $5,000 from RAFTA. Essentially, this is intended to be a cost-benefit analysis of infrastructure projects between the airport and specifically Service Center Road and the Maroon Creek Roundabout. And the specific goals of the study are to look at infrastructure improvements that can increase bicycle and pedestrian connectivity to transit and increase safety, and to look at infrastructure projects that can increase transit speed and efficiency through this corridor. And essentially, this is to provide guidance in order to prioritize transit projects within the near to midterm within this corridor. And I can say, through my tenure in this position, there's been a myriad of infrastructure suggestions and ideas that have come up. It's a very complicated corridor, and the goal here is to try to look at it as a whole and figure out which ones can provide the best cost benefit for the EOTC dollars and the public dollars, and start advancing those projects in the nearer term. The timing of it is staff's opinion that timing of this study is appropriate in order to try to stay ahead of other things that are moving forward. And that includes the vision for the airport, which is moving through and looking to hopefully come to fruition by the end of the year, from what I understand, as well as looking at upcoming developments in the AABC. We now have an idea of the range of number of units that are coming up. And I think in order to stay ahead of the curve, it's not necessarily important to know what type of units those may be or where specifically in the AABC those may be, but to understand within the AABC, these are the range of units that we're looking at and that we need to start planning for. And then thirdly, we have, as I mentioned before, we've got the Brush Creek Park and Ride in the Town of Snowmass Village Transit Center, hopefully coming to fruition, at least on the EOTC side by 2022, which means that we need to start looking at what are we going to start tackling in the nearer term, in that near to midterm. This study is intended to consider all existing plans and studies. So from my perspective, the most important one in the range is the Airport Access Control Plan. And as that gets implemented, how is that going to impact transit user access in that area? And how can we try to get ahead of the curve on that development and try to facilitate that transit access within the AABC and airport area? It would also take into account the 2017 Parsons study, which, as you know, looked at the BRT enhancements through that corridor, the City of Aspen Maroon Creek Roundabout study that occurred earlier this year, as well as new development transportation studies included with the developments that are coming up. So I know that the County Engineering Department has been looking at what will be the impacts from the new developments coming up in the AABC in relation to transit access, vehicle access. And so this study would take all of that into account and apply it more on the regional basis for the EOTC to consider in terms of expenditure of funds. So again, this is intended to look at the cost-benefit analysis, and it is intended to identify that low-hanging fruit and how it relates to higher-dollar projects. So how does a sidewalk trail connection compare, say, to the Buttermilk Underpass or the Harmony Owl Creek Road realignment or in Aspen Country Inn connection? So not necessarily that this would prioritize those lower-cost infrastructure projects, but that it's trying to look at them all together to identify more or less that capital program to start working our way through those projects. And then lastly, I did want to touch on what the study is not intended to do. So it is not intended to resolve the entrance to Aspen record of decision or analyze offline or off-mainline transit or analyze other operations. So it's not intended to look at private shuttles in the bus lane or off-mainline service to the airport or the AABC shuttle or new bus routes. So those would all be considered other operations, and I think need to be considered in line with, say, the airport redevelopment in terms of shuttles serving that specific facility, and other developments as they come online, and other efforts possibly more in the longer term. And then finally, I did want to touch on how this relates back to the Comprehensive Valley Transportation Plan priorities. So it does progress the first and last mile solutions, and it directly addresses the transit speed, accessibility, reliability, efficiency enhancements within the regional priorities. It also, within the Upper Valley priorities, it specifically goes head on with the bicycle and pedestrian connections to transit stops, as well as starts to make progress on the airport and AABC multimodal transit hub and transit circulation enhancements. So moving on then to the bicycle and pedestrian connection to the Brush Creek Park and Ride feasibility study. So this is the third of the four new requests. This is a request or ask from the EOTC again in $25,000 for a $75,000 total project. So this is a partnership project with the EOTC, Pickens County Open Space and Trails, and the City of Aspen Parks and Open Space. And the feasibility study cost share is anticipated to be split 1/3 for each partner. The CVTP goals advanced include park and ride lot improvements and first and last mile solutions, as well as, and more specifically, the Upper Valley priority of bicycle pedestrian connecting to transit stops and specifically the Brush Creek Park and Ride. So we're really making progress on that priority by moving forward with this feasibility study. This would be an update to the 2014 study that was done by Pickens County Open Space and Trails. And it's my understanding that at the time, the Board of County Commissioners directed Open Space and Trails to develop a partnership in order to move this forward. And that's what's happening at this time. So Open Space and Trails is developing that partnership with the EOTC and the City of Aspen Parks and Open Space, looking to progress this project forward. So to put this into context right now, right now we're looking at technically feasible options that are to go out for public outreach beginning in 2022. But that public outreach and the role of the EOTC and Pickens County Open Space and Trails Board and the City of Aspen Parks and Open Space and Trails Board has not yet been determined. So that would be determined once we get through the feasibility study, we have that updated, we would start developing a plan for that outreach and how each of the boards specifically would be engaged. And then finally, and fourthly on the list is the aerial connection feasibility study. The staff recommendation on this is not expenditure of funds at this time, but instead to move forward with a technology survey looking at available aerial technologies that might be applicable in this situation that we have within the valley. This was a public request. The request was in the amount of $50,000. I would note that for $50,000, you're getting that high-level analysis of the aerial connection. So you would get a general possible alignment, a review of technologies, and a ballpark cost. Should the EOTC really be serious about moving forward, we would need a more full range feasibility study as a next step, or possibly including the higher level feasibility study. That, from my conversations with consulting firms, looks to be about $400,000. That would include ridership forecasts, travel patterns, market analysis, modeling, permitting, and cost and funding analysis, in addition to specific alignments, technologies, and more specific costs. I did want to point out as well with this that as a part of the Upper Valley Mobility Report and the task force from 2016 and 2017, there was a mountain-to-mountain aerial connection contemplated in there. And what's being requested here is a different alignment from what was contemplated within the Upper Valley Mobility Report. So the alignment here is Brush Creek Park and Ride up to Aspen along Highway 82, and the Park and Ride along Brush Creek Road up to the town of Snowmass Village. So much more of a commuter-oriented service than what was contemplated within the Upper Valley Mobility Report, but we're not looking at crossing federal lands or wilderness or anything like that with this alignment. The staff recommendation, again, is for staff to review those technologies before expenditure of funds and really moving forward. We'd say going through the prep meetings, some of the feedback that I received mixed feedback on this. And while I'm happy to go through this, I think staff is happy to go through this if the EOTC is interested in seeing the results. On the staff side, I think that you're not hurting our feelings if you decide that you don't want to take a look at this at this time. We have a lot of things on our plate, and we are able to there are other efforts that we can be putting our time into. So if you want to move forward with it, we're happy to. If you're not interested at this time, I think it's a topic that we can discuss in 2022 when we really start getting more into the long-range planning discussions. I think this is appropriate at that time when we're looking at a myriad of possible more longer-term technology options. So I wanted to throw that out there. And then moving on.
Before you move forward past that item, I have a hand up here from Ward. I just want to check in. Ward, was this about the aerial connection?
Yes, it is. I don't want to have any expenditure of fund or staff time on this. I've looked at this independently, and I'm convinced that it's a no-go, and I just don't want to waste any time on it.
All right, thanks. We'll take other board member comments on this item in a little bit. Let's go ahead and let David get through a little bit more, but we will revisit this, any topics that you want. I've got a hand up from George.
And comment when it's appropriate.
Okay, then I'll just come back to you when Dave's done with his initial presentation.
All right. Well, we should just have a few more slides here. I did want to highlight that we did do some expenditure scoring moving through this budgeting process. We hit on this again a little bit at the prep meetings, and the expenditures for the EOTC were scored by staff against the identified EOTC strategic plan and comprehensive valley transportation plan priorities. And those were scored by City of Aspen, Town of Snowmass Village, RAFTA, and EOTC staff. And then all of those scores were averaged together for the matrix that you see in your packet. The purpose here was to assist staff in identifying which of those expenditures do we have that really best meets the strategic plan and CVTP, and which ones may not. And I think that was talk about it here in a minute, but I think that it was a pretty valuable process, at least for me. And the identified top priorities from that exercise included the no-fare Aspen, Snowmass, Woody Creek bus service. So it highlighted that we don't want to see any lapse of that no-fare service. The Brush Creek Park and Ride flap grant match. So this, I think, is in line with the feedback that we received from the EOTC through the design process, that this is a high priority for the EOTC to get on the ground and done as soon as possible. And then the Snowmass Mall Transit Station also ranked high within those priorities. So this is the overall matrix. Obviously, it's too small to walk through line by line here, but for orientation's sake, we did have the mission statement, vision statement along the left-hand side, guiding principles, and the key strategies. Then we had a description from the strategic plan, and then we went through and ranked them all in terms of how we felt each of those met each of those criteria. And that was for both existing obligations and new requests and renewals. Oops. My presentation doesn't seem to be coming up. Oh, there it is. So to put this in here so that you can actually see the scoring, and the three that scored the highest, so this is out of a possible 40 points, included, again, the no-fare service, Brush Creek Park and Ride, and Snowmass Mall Transit Center, all in the mid-30s. The studies, so the IMS, the Upper Valley Transit Enhancement Study, and the Bicycle Pedestrian Connection to the Brush Creek Park and Ride were all mid to upper 20s, while the subsidies were all mid to upper 20s as well. I think an important piece that came out of this wasn't just which one scored high, but which one scored low. And the Aspen Country Inn Taxi and Loo program by far scored the lowest at only 17 points. And so this was important to me as staff to say, okay, this is an area that we should probably look at and try to bring that in line with the strategic plan goals and make sure our expenditures are in line as possible. I think it's worth noting as well that this is a very small expenditure for the EOTC at $4,000 to $7,000 annually. However, we do have the Upper Valley Transit Enhancement Study proposed this year, that this study would look at this corridor and hopefully we would be able to identify some more infrastructure improvements that might be able to, if not eliminate this subsidy, at least limit it and minimize it so that we're meeting the strategic plan to the greatest amount possible. And then finally, we've got the unobligated EOTC fund balance. So the staff, as a part of this budget, is proposing to replace the lock boxes with a one-line item entitled the unobligated EOTC fund balance. And what this is the overall EOTC fund balance for a given year minus that year's operational expenses plus that year and future year's project obligations. So what this shows is in a given year, what portion of the EOTC fund balance is currently not obligated to a project or operations. And it's staff's opinion that this increases the transparency and understanding of the EOTC budget while reducing its complexity. It also aligns better with the priority for regionalism, which we heard loud and clear at the EOTC retreat. It also staff's opinion that it continues to address the need to protect obligated funds, which was one of the main items and reasons for implementing the lockboxes to begin with, as well as this line item can be used to help save for large projects coming up. So if we know that there's a large project coming up that we want to save for, we can identify that project, that estimated cost amount, and then we can see each year when we actually get to the point of being able to fund X project. And to show this on the budget itself, so this is the full EOTC budget. You can see the unobligated EOTC fund balance line circled in red. And then to just blow it up so that it's legible, if you look at specific, I think 2021 is probably the easiest year to understand. So we've got an overall fund balance in 2021 of $7.279 million. In 2022, we also have an expense that's proposed in this budget of $6 million for the Town of Snowmass Village Transit Center. So this subtracts out that $6 million, and you can easily do the math to see that the unobligated fund balance then is $1.279 million, even though we have $7.27 in the bank account. And so then moving into 2022, presumably that those funds are expended for the transit center, and then you see that the overall EOTC fund balance is the same as the unobligated balance, because in those years and all years after that, we have no projects currently obligated between 2023 and 2025. And then just to circle back to the 30,000-foot view again and the development goals. Again, we're continuing to work on the EOTC, getting the internal house in order, so to speak, with the completion of the strategic plan and comprehensive value transportation plan in 2020. Sorry, I need some water.
I don't doubt it.
And then we will continue to work on updating the EOTC IGA in the spring of 2021. So we'll come to you with a staff recommendation in terms of updating that IGA and how to clarify the decision-making process within that document. And then at the same time, we continue to work on completing the current projects, again, including the Brush Creek Park and Ride Flap Grant. We also have the Food and Truck Farm Stand Experiment, which, if it's approved this in November by the Planning Commission for the location and extent, would probably move forward in 2021. We have the Town of Snowmass Village Transit Center, the dynamic message sign. We need to get that up and running. So getting the infrastructure in place is one thing. Now we need to figure out how it's all going to be operated and how it works. The no fare service, again, and those ongoing discussions with RAFTA about possibly transferring that cost from the EOTC to RAFTA in 2022 when funding levels stabilize. And then moving into 2021, the studies, the bike ped connection to Rio Grande, the IMS Phase 2, the Upper Valley Transit Enhancement Study, and the Aerial Connection Technology Survey are all intended to feed into identifying that short to mid-term effort within the 1 to 5 years, so 2022 and beyond. So then we can finally move into, I think, more long-term conversations in terms of long-term planning. And I know that there's some eagerness to move on and start discussing a lot of these long-term things. I think it's important that we continue to get the EOTC internal house in order, so to speak, finish that up, complete the IGA, and make sure that we're moving forward with the strategic plan and CVTP that we have. So we've got that background and that concurrence. In the meantime, we've also got projects and efforts going while we have those conversations so that we're not stalling everything else out in the meantime. So that's really what we're working toward here. I hope that all makes sense in how the budget fits into that overall plan. And again, this is what we heard from the retreat last year. And with that, I would like to, the staff recommendation is that the EOTC adopt the staff proposed 2021 budget. As a reminder, the next section is going through the work plan. It will be a much shorter section, I promise, in terms of presentation, because we did cover a lot of it here in the budget section, but I thought it was necessary that you have that background and see how things fit in from our perspective.
Thank you, David. Take another sip of water, couple of breaths, catch your air a little bit there. A quick, albeit thorough, budget proposal. So let's go with board comments. So George, I've got George, Rachel, and then Steve. So I'm going to start with George.
Great, thanks, Tori, and thanks, Dave. This was a great presentation. It just shows the extent of the work ahead of us. Some huge projects, the Snowmass Transportation Center, the Brush Creek Park and Ride. Those are huge projects that we've been talking about and working on for years. So to see them to come to fruition will be wonderful. And to those comments, I just don't see any need to utilize staff resources for an aerial connection feasibility study or technical study. It just makes no sense at all. I think it's time that we just put this idea to bed, or better yet, just put it in the grave where it belongs. So I just can't support, and I hope the rest of the EOTC will understand that just because one person has an idea to come before the EOTC for public funding, it doesn't mean it should end up on the list. It should be discussed and then either move forward or just discard it. And it's time that we just discard this idea.
Thanks, George. I guess we're going to get some more comments from other members as well. And with that, I would also just say, George, I think a lot of us do think of, that mass transit or next level of mass transit, or maybe not, but I'm just asking you, do you see other, not necessarily now, but do you see that there would be other opportunity for this kind of concept, not whether it's an aerial transit, but just as we look to the future, are we thinking of other modes besides the rubber tire solution on the road with buses and stuff now? What do you think about that, George?
Well, we look very closely at the rail connection from the Brush Creek intercept lot through the airport into Aspen with the Aspen Community Transportation Forum, and the cost was just exorbitant. It was $500 million. So that doesn't mean that perhaps some future technology that may be cost effective will come down the line in 10 or 15 years, but it has to be something that's going to be utilized, that is safe, that could actually function. And the gondola as a transportation system has all sorts of problems, especially at our altitude with weather. So I think there may be some other opportunities down the road as technology provides it, but I don't see this as one of them.
Thank you for that. I've got Rachel and then Steve.
Right, thank you so much. I just wanted to weigh in on the Country Inn issue that's there, David, and this was all before your time with us, but the EOTC pretty much made a hard commitment to the residents of the Country Inn at the time when we were adding the bus lanes. And so at the time of adding the bus lanes and the entrance to Aspen, the question came before the EOTC, should we build the underpass here now? Because it went from being a 2-lane road to a 4-lane road that those people would have to cross to get the bus down valley or to get off the bus from in town across. And that project is a senior and low-income priority housing. And so the EOTC said at that time, well, look at the interest on $500,000, and we'd be better off just paying for this bus service forever rather than building the underpass at the time when the highway construction was happening, when the flaggers were there, and all the disturbance happened. So I'd hate to see us make a commitment to affordable housing project for cost-saving measures and then later eliminate the compromise that was struck rather than spend the money on the underpass. So I just want to put that out there. That was a commitment by the EOTC. I hate to see it just disappear. The second is I will certainly second George's comments about not spending more money on the aerial tramway concept. If anything, the ski company did do a study a while ago. Maybe they still have a copy of it in Bob Maynard's time period, that Hal Clark go over to Europe and ride the trams over there and look at how it would work here. And I know we're not talking about that alignment, but I think a lot of the similar issues about how people feel about riding it at 4:30 in the evening in the winter were valid. So no, I don't want to spend any staff time or staff money on that. And then the third thing, I guess, is just to throw it out there for people to start thinking about with the future big plans. But I've started to think, well, I wonder if Brush Creek intercept lot, we should think long term and see what the legalities would be of potentially putting some underground parking there. I think that when we look at the airport business study, we're going to see the parking at the airport need is pretty dramatic looking into the future. As we are looking to maximize density at the Lumberyard Affordable Housing Project, how much gets spent on underground parking or whatever is clearly there. We have car storage problems across the town where people say, hey, if I had a place to store it, I'd leave it out of town. And I think that's been a long-term goal in many ways for reducing congestion is letting people find a way to store their car. Oddly enough, if you don't have a parking space, you drive it every day to move it to find another parking space where you won't get a ticket, So there is that aspect. So again, I know it's a lot of legalities in terms of CDOT having originally purchased this, but again, I know it's a long-term thing, but I think we really should think about how do you really capture all the cars and how do you create a place to store cars. People love to talk about the Zermatt example for a car-free downtown and little electric cars and golf carts or whatever. But the truth is they have a 10,000 car parking storage outside their town below the So anyhow, I just wanted to throw that out there. I think we should be able to think about how we maximize the use of that over the next 30 years, not just the next 5 years. Thank you all.
Rachel, quick question for you there.
Yeah.
And at the risk of drawing the ire of many, you mentioned underground parking there at the Brush Creek parking lot, but is there any appetite for 1 or 2 levels of above ground?
I think you'd have some real concerns with the Brush Creek neighbors. I've always thought that the potential of a cut and cover additional level similar to the parking underneath the Meadows tennis courts would be something when we outgrow the surface parking. But what has also occurred to me is that, once you do that kind of platform parking to go up 1 level, you're not going to disturb it to go underground. You'd be committed to one path or the other. So, yeah, I know underground's a lot more expensive than surface,
right.
But I do think you have some real concerns that have been legitimately already voiced by the Woody Creek Caucus and others about the appearance of the garage of the area as it is.
Yes.
So that's maybe why I trended to think underground. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks. Steve Child, I've got Steve, and then Ann, and then Skippy.
Thank you, Tori. I really like this budget as presented. It's really a solid budget. I like the fact that it's moving forward the big projects, the Snowmass Transit Center, the Brush Creek Park and Ride expansion and improvements there being the two big ones. And then, continuing the studies that we have done up to this point, kind of fleshing them out some more. It's not really tackling any more big projects right now, which we don't need any more big projects in a time of the economic uncertainty. I think we need to be somewhat cautious, but we are moving forward the things we have been working on. In relation to the Aspen Country Inn, I think I've been in favor of doing a walking bike path from there to Truscott, the Truscott bus stop, going over the old Maroon Creek Trestle. that would be an alternative way that people could get, those who can walk and are able, or perhaps there would be a bicycle connection from there, that they could get to a RAFTA bus stop where there is already an existing underpass. And that's just an alternative way that for some of the residents there, I think that would work. Now, on the item that David talked about, all the things from the ABC or from the Service Center Road to the roundabout, I think looking at a path from Buttermilk to Truscott Place along that side of the highway should be one of the things that's contemplated there as a possibility. I think it would be a good amenity to have for the people on the Buttermilk and the Aspen country and side of the road. In terms of looking at the alternative mass transit technologies for getting, say, from the Brush Creek Park and Ride into town, I like David's suggestion a couple of years down the road from now, doing a little deeper dive into looking at whatever available technologies there are at that time and kind of comparing the different ones. All the time you're seeing sort of new proposed people mover sort of things that are being used other places or experimented with. And then by 2022, they're, taking a look at the various technologies that are out there, I think would be a wise thing to do. I was on the light rail transit study group back in 1973, I think it was. We were all in favor of doing the light rail transit clear back then. And as George pointed out, that's hugely expensive now, but I think there could be some other things that are, would be feasible and within the price range that they'd be worth looking at, but definitely not now. And just as an aside, the question you asked Rachel about the underground parking or the above ground parking, just today we were looking at the airport, and on the opposite side of the highway from the airport is actually some land owned by the airport that is on the airport layout plan. We are looking at that for a solar farm kind of a thing. But just today I suggested maybe we should think about putting some parking with the solar on top of it. So the parking would kind of be sunken down. People driving along the highway they would see solar panels, they wouldn't see parking there. But that would be and I was thinking for the rental car fleet or for long-term parking from the airport, using it for that, because it is on airport land. But it could potentially be used for some, other parking in the ABC area. Just want to toss that idea out there. It wouldn't look like a parking garage. It would look like a solar farm based on what the ALP looks like right now. So that's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I've got Ann, Skippy, and then Ward.
Yeah. First, Dave, thanks for such a detailed and just comprehensive presentation. Really appreciate it. A couple of questions. A few years ago, I questioned, and at that time it wasn't even $7,000, but I questioned the expense for the taxi and if that was the best way to use our money. After lots of discussion, I realized that it's a very small expenditure, but it's a very valued and in some ways irreplaceable service. So I support going ahead with that and have since we had the discussion a few years ago. Secondly, looking at the bike-ped connection from Service Road to the roundabout, I'm unclear. There's a pretty good bike path all the way to ABC, and then it kind of breaks up getting down to the service center. So I'm wondering really how much you're looking at out there. And I've got one other question you respond to and one other comment, so I'll finish real quick. So that's the first one. In terms of the gondola, again, with the uncertainty in the economy and all those negatives you showed us on the budgets going forward, and the fact that $50,000 might end up turning into $400,000, I'd suggest we wait on that. And I think that good points have been made about keeping our eyes open to alternative transportation. But right now, finishing up what we have and not actively going after those alternatives. And the last is, and I can't see on the slide, sorry. Did I miss it? Are we still looking into the Buttermilk underpass? So the two questions: bike ped along 82, and then the Buttermilk underpass. Thanks.
Would you like me to respond to those now, Tori?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah. So in terms of connections, bike ped connections along this corridor, you're correct that there's a lot of really good bicycle and pedestrian access along this corridor already. But there's also some gaps. And I think that what we're starting to see now is that we're getting to the point where it's not just as simple as necessarily a sidewalk connection here, although that does still exist, similar to what Steve was bringing up earlier, that, ways we could enhance the Aspen country and connection. So we do have some opportunities like that, but really what we're starting to look at now is the Buttermilk underpass is still out there. We're not actively looking at it now. So that has been more or less put on ice since the last time we did the concept review, and that was before I came on board here. So I'm not too sure exactly all of the conversations that surrounded that, unfortunately. But this is intended to look at things like the Buttermilk underpass, as well as the sidewalk connections that Steve brought up, as well as other things. So we've got the access control plan, again, coming in with the airport, and that's looking at a whole new signalized intersection out there. And so we need to be ahead of that. I think that we need to be ahead of that in terms of how that could impact bicycle and pedestrian access at that point, to make sure that when that is constructed, or if that is constructed, we have a solid recommendation going forward for we need X bicycle and pedestrian improvements so that we don't necessarily lose access. And ideally, we can enhance access using that. So really trying to capitalize on these projects coming forward. So I think that there's a number of things, big and small, that can be looked at. I don't know, just to hit back on the Aspen Country Inn and the commitments that the EOTC has made to those residents, I'm by no means recommending that we cut off that funding. I think that we need to maintain that. The only way I think that we could really stop that entirely is if we did have an underpass or overpass, something grade separated at that location. And I'm just not too sure with the number of people out there that would be financially responsible. So it may very well mean in that specific instance that we maintain our service, but say we can use Steve's idea to help connect over to the other underpass and thereby pay less out for that service if we can just divert some of those trips. So that's some of the things that we're looking for in terms of this study. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, Ann. Skippy and then Ward. And I would ask if you raise your hand and you've spoken and can take your hand down, that'd be great. Skippy and then Ward.
Yeah, thanks. Nice to see everybody. Nice to be back, even if just digitally. Thank you, Dave, for all your work. I support the budget and the work plan as they are. I just wanted to quickly chime in on the aerial and what Rachel was saying about parking out at the intercept lot, just to sort of seed the conversation for the future. I definitely share a vision of downtown Aspen with less or no cars in the core. And to do that, you need an alternative transit solution to get there, and you need somewhere to put the cars before they arrive. So whether that is out at the Brush Creek Park and Ride, sunken above grade with solar or greenery, whether that is an aerial or something else, as it said, I don't know the answer to that. But I do want to be looking at those things and planning for that future, including the aerial. I did ask at our preparatory meeting, hey, I know a lot of work on the aerial has been done before I was around or paying attention. Do we already know that this is a non-starter? And if so, can I see that evidence, because I'm not interested in wasting time and money? And the answer was no. We've looked at other iterations, but to really know, we need to look at it again. So I do want to do that and other things. However, I'm not wed to it happening this year. As Steve said, these technologies are evolving very quickly. It's not happening immediately. So if it's next year, that's totally fine with me. But I do want to suggest that we keep that broader discussion aforementioned by several on the docket. And if it's this year, I'm good with that. And if it's next year, that's fine too.
Thanks, Skippy. And let's go Ward and then George. Ward and then George.
Yeah, thank you. David, thank you for immersively short and succinct presentation on the budget. It is appreciated. I'll briefly mention Ariel. I'd like to put a wooden stake through its heart. We did look at that at the Aspen Institute Forum. It doesn't meet the criteria of being scalable. That's all I'm going to say about that aspect of the discussion. But what I did want to thank Rachel and Steve both for bringing up the possibility of some kind of satellite parking that may be available either at the park and ride or at the land that the airport owns. I think it's somewhere around where RAFTA land barn is now. Using that as, and this could be parochial, but for the city of Aspen, workforce housing satellite parking. It's something that we've, it's been kicked around a bit for a couple of years anyway, that particularly as we're planning the lumberyard, but other workforce housing projects as well, that I personally would rather have fewer parking spaces and intentionally underpark, because I'd rather build units for people than parking space for cars. But with the realization that people that live in workforce housing have toys and second cars as well, that we should have a place where they could park or store their vehicles or toys. And I would like to get EOTC support at looking at the feasibility of either that airport land or at the park and ride, first to see how many spaces were needed before we make any judgments on what form of parking that is. But some kind of secure parking available to residents of workforce housing, whether it be Snowmass Village, Pickens County, or Aspen, APSHA, any kind of workforce housing storage for second vehicles and toys. I think that would be a really, really beneficial addition to the city of Aspen and this upper valley. Thank you.
Okay. We'll come back to that. George and then Rachel. George, you may be muted.
Sure.
Yep, got you.
Great. Just following up with Ann's comments regarding question on the Buttermilk Underpass, and ask Dave, when you're looking at the Upper Valley Transit enhancement study, and the Buttermilk Underpass will be one part of that, I just wonder if you, when you think about prioritizing projects, looking at available funding, the Buttermilk Underpass has a commitment by RAFTA for $500,000 from RAFTA to 2040. It's on a high priority list for CDOT's Intermountain Transportation Planning Region. And so there's money that's waiting or available that could be utilized. And when we look at the airport, when we look at the housing development from Burlingame 3 to the lumberyard, I know WeCycle is very interested and excited about having some recycle stops over by Buttermilk and in the ABC to enable people to move around back and forth. So, again, Dave, I'm just curious if the funding opportunities become part of that equation in terms of prioritizing.
I would say yes, for sure. So certainly any secured funding would be considered. So as part of, say, RAFTA's 2040 and the $500,000 there, that could be considered in the equation, as well as the priorities for the IMTPR. I think these are all things that we're looking to take into account and need to look at it more on the universal basis along that corridor, I guess. And that's what this is looking to get at. So we are looking at considering that, I guess, is the short answer.
Thank you. Rachel?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll be brief. David, when you're looking at the autonomous vehicles, I think it's really important to look at car storage at night. I mean, where do they all park? And so that was, again, potentially part of me thinking about Brush Creek Intercept lot. But you might have a future where there are a lot of autonomous cars that go park themselves at night somewhere. Again, that should be linked in there as one of the big questions about autonomous cars. A, how do they handle rush hour? And B, where do you park them all at night? So there's that. And then the second, I look forward to ideas to reduce the cost of country in. I can imagine that you would get into having to snowplow that Maroon Creek Bridge and make it safe and walkable to get over to the next stop all winter long, but it'd be free in the summer, so it'd be good. And I guess the other thing is just to add, I do support the budget that has been presented. I'm really excited to see CMS moving on its transit center. It's gone through a number of different iterations over the years. But I do think that one of the things, I agree with the no lot box and prioritizing projects and spreading it around where we get the most bang for the buck. But there is a point at which we do need to keep track of kind of where the generation of revenues are coming from. And it doesn't have a price tag in our big long-term plans, but obviously the entrance to Aspen is going to need it one day. And, the Castle Creek Bridge is already pretty obsolete. It doesn't have a long, useful life. We will need to be replacing that before it fails. And so there's some pretty big capital things we will need to be saving up for, I guess, is the point. And at that point, we really should continue. And I'm really also equally excited to see so much of Snowmass Base Village having really now come online as well, because that makes a big difference both for the town's budgets and Snowmass and all of our needs. So this is a good thing, but again, I just don't want 10 or 15 years into the future to not really be able to solve the last link in this problem that literally everyone who lives on the other side of the Castle Creek Bridge deals with daily. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Rachel. Let me see. Quick questions, David, just for history, and maybe somebody else knows it and wants to share it. But in this lockbox conversation, the ballot language of 2000 had a set aside for voter approved set aside for Snowmass, but we talk about locked boxes as in two. There was another delineation of funds targeted towards Aspen. Was that also in the ballot language of 2000, or was that not, and that was just kind of an EOTC agreement? And I guess the only reason I'm asking is I'm not against the budget or the allocation or even putting those into the discretionary funds. I just want to know what the history is a little bit. I haven't been at this seat or this table, in some years, and I know that funds were used for Ruby Park and stuff like that, but was there another lockbox that was supposed to be maintained for other usage?
My understanding is no. So there was never a third lockbox, and so the sequence that I understand was when the ballot measure was approved. Time went on. Started planning for the for usage of those specific funds, the $7 million up in Snowmass. It was eventually programmed for the transit center, and then there was concern that the EOTC may not have enough funds in its coffers in order to pay out at the time that it's needed. So at that point, the lockboxes were created as a budgeting mechanism only within the spreadsheet for the EOTC.
Okay.
But it was never defined in terms of where Snowmass began or ended in that scenario, or where Aspen began and ended, and any expenditure required full EOTC approval, regardless of which lockbox it came out of. So by going this route, we're not changing anything of that nature. It still requires the full EOTC buy-in for any expenditure, and we are still preserving the Town of Snowmass Village's funding that is voter obligated.
Okay, that's kind of the feeling I had with it. Rachel, you have some more background on that?
Yeah, just briefly, Tori, the 2000 vote outlined a number of uses of the half penny, and I think it must have been a separate question to ask for bonding authority as well. But that was 20 years ago, so the bonding authority has gone away. And there were specific uses of the money, but it was also thought at the time that should the entrance to Aspen have moved forward, that would have been the bonding mechanism for some of it. The real thing, though, is that it was all supplanted later, and I can't remember whether it was 2004 or 2006, when the Regional Transportation Authority needed more money, and the EOTC agreed, and throughout the valley, people were raising their rates of tax that was going to RAFTA. The EOTC decided to dedicate more of the half penny to RAFTA in that vote. And so that's why we've steadily been getting down to less and less capital overall, but none of the three bodies wanted to try to raise taxes while they were still collecting this EOTC money. And it made sense. And so, again, we just have less building up every year for capital, and it's always been the danger that the entire amount will eventually go to operating. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Okay, well, this is a budget discussion here. I have maybe another question about the Brush Creek Park and Ride, but I think I will wait for that maybe till the end of the agenda here. So I'll come back to that. Any members of Snowmass Village that care to comment on the budget at this time? And if not, we're going to move forward. I do have hands up from Ward and George, but I don't know if I think those might still be from previous comments.
I believe Markey has a comment.
Sorry, Tori, old hand.
No worries. Markey?
Okay. We've had a lot of conversation on the budget tonight, which I really do believe has been extremely well done. And Dave, I applaud all of your work. Good job. I would like to put forth a motion to approve and adopt this budget, and with the addition of the taxi service.
I'll second that. I think the taxi service is in the budget. It was more about discussion for it going forward.
Okay, thank you, Rachel, but I really do want that to continue. It's extremely important for the residents of that complex.
Thank you.
There is a motion and a second.
Second.
I'm sorry? Okay.
Yep. Second.
All right, a motion and a second has been made. I'm looking for, I guess, individual jurisdictions. Of course, this will come back to you, but individual jurisdictions. We'll start with Snowmass. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Pitkin County? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And City of Aspen, all those in favor say aye.
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 That sounded like 5. Any opposed? All right. David, that is a very well done and prepared budget. You work around a lot of different edges there, so thank you very much for that. And if you want to move forward on our agenda, we'll go on to the work plan.
Yes, so the next agenda item is the 2020 EOTC work plan. I promise this will be shorter than the budget presentation. We have covered a lot of these items already. So as an overview for the work plan in 2020, we are looking at, again, the update to the EOTC IGA, continuing the EOTC budget mitigation discussions with RAFTA regarding the no fare service, with Brush Creek Park and Ride, moving forward with the flap improvements and to construction, hopefully in 2021, but most likely in 2022. Continuing forward with the food truck and farm stand experiment, if that is approved through Pitkin County, and continuing on, or starting the bicycle and pedestrian connection to the Rio Grande AABC feasibility study. Then we've got the other 3 studies of the IMS Phase 2, the Upper Valley Transit Enhancement Study, and the Aerial Connection Technology Survey is in the work plan. And then to orient you to the work plan itself, it is a several-page document here. I'm not going to go through this line by line, but we do have the elements of the work plan. We've got the action items, responsible parties. So those are the individuals that are involved carrying that action forward, the timeline to get it done, the expected outcome from that action. And then new this year, because we now have a strategic plan and updated comprehensive valley transportation plan, is how these items link back to that strategic plan and CVTP. So again, on the left side, we've got the actions that we've already discussed in terms of EOTC IGA update, EOTC budget mitigation, the Brush Creek Park and Ride improvements, in terms of construction, farm stand, and the bike ped feasibility study. We also have the integrated mobility system study Phase 2 and the Upper Valley Transit Enhancement Study. And then on the last page, we have the Aerial Connection Technology Survey Study. And then the last row here is more or less a catch-all. So it's got participate in snowmass, transit center, airport, and regional transportation planning, visioning. So this is the EOTC, as you know, is in one of the designing entities for the transit center and snowmass that is sits with the town of Snowmass Village Town Council. But I do plug in there as appropriate in order to represent the EOTC in those discussions. Similarly with the airport and plugging in there as appropriate, and specifically around the ground transportation in and out of the airport. And then regional transportation planning and visioning. I think it feels like a decade ago now, but if you'll recall, in March of this year, we were supposed to have an elected officials summit. That was canceled about a week before it was supposed to occur because of COVID-19. I do understand that there is some interest on the staff level, but we're still more or less putting that on ice for now until COVID-19 settles down. Because we don't want to have an outbreak amongst all of the region-wide elected officials. And we think that it would be more productive in person if we are able to do it, and without the distraction of COVID-19, if that's possible. So those are the reasons why we've kind of put it on ice, but it's still, we're keeping tabs on where we're at to try to move that forward at some point in the future.
David, you might have a few questions right there. If I could stop you for 1 second, I'm going to ask
okay.
Ann, and then George. I've got 2 hands up, Ann, and then George.
Yeah, I would like to see, and this is open for discussion, obviously, the Buttermilk Underpass as a specific part of the work plan. And then secondly, I didn't hear any support for the aerial tramway study to be part of the work plan. Other comments?
Yeah, David, it looks, the Aerial Connection Technology Survey here, you have described as a staff level survey looking for the information kind of that Skippy was maybe requesting, I guess. I don't know. Can you just fill us in? Why is that there, and how does that fit into your work plan?
So the aerial connection survey, that is anticipated to be staff level. So that would be an effort led by myself with other jurisdictional staff as appropriate, reaching out to manufacturers and other applications of aerial technology around the world to see if what technology is currently available and if it could be applicable in this situation, particularly as a commuter type service, because as was noted before, we do have about a 6.5-mile stretch that we would need to span between Aspen and the Brush Creek Park and Ride. You know, if you use just a standard gondola, you're looking at, even a high-speed gondola, you're looking at 45 minutes, and that's just not workable in terms of a technology to apply to that situation. But there are other aerial tram technologies. I'm not clear, and would require some digging and some research to figure out where that technology is at in terms of being climate controlled and being able to move fast enough to actually be competitive with the buses and the private automobile, as it would need to be in order to be a viable commuter alternative. And then if we're going up to snowmass, this technology would need to both work on level ground, fairly level ground going up to Aspen, but it would also need to climb the hill going up to snowmass. So we do have some challenges, and I think further research and conversations would be necessary before we would really say that it's time to expend money moving forward with it. So that's how it fits in. The plan is that we would bring that survey back to you in July at that meeting, along with the results from the other studies that we have going, and recommend to you a tiered approach to begin tackling the outcomes from those studies and moving forward with them.
So you're suggesting a few hours on your weekends kind of thing, and
I'm just questioning if there is. I mean, that all sounds very reasonable, Dave. But you keep saying staff, but staff is you, and you've got a lot of stuff to do. And I would like to hear if there's support from the majority of the board to go ahead with that, or if that is something on the back burner.
Okay. Thank you, Ann. I'll take the temperature here in a second on that. I think Ann brings up a really valid question there, whether that should stay on or not. I've got a hand up from George. George, comments? You're muted.
Or I have my hand up too. It's Marky.
Okay. Once again, I'm looking at virtual hand raising. I can't see everybody because there's a presentation. So if you can raise your hand virtually, that'd help too.
Well,
I'll go to, I saw Alyssa, and then I saw Marky. Alyssa and then Marky.
I didn't have my hand up. I was just putting my hair up because I was hot.
Okay. Marky, go right ahead.
Yeah, you know, we've heard a lot about this aerial tram, and quite frankly, we've got a lot of balls in the that are getting loaded right now in terms of future expansion of the park and ride, consideration of perhaps putting something underground, which I think might be a good idea. I'm not willing, and of course this is my last meeting, so I'm a lame duck, but I'll speak. Just the notion of Dave gave us an estimate that it would take about $400,000 to $500,000 to really look at what an air connection study would truly look like. We don't have that kind of money, and I would prefer to put my priorities and priorities towards let's work on what we've got in front of us, the work plan, the various studies that are already being funded or proposed. And perhaps 2 years from now, pick up the area.
Thank you, Marky. So David, let's get some clarity here. So there's been some, talk about not supporting this work. Are you saying to EOTC that it is a minimal amount of hours that you interested in putting into this?
I think that it's a notable number of hours to really get a full-scale picture of what's out there and what's possible, which is part of the reason I haven't dove to that extent into it yet. So if it was a minimal number of hours, I would have already done that work. And that's part of the reason why I included it in this work plan, so that you have the chance to consider it in line with all of the other things, and as Marky said, balls in the air for the EOTC at this time.
Okay, then we've heard a few members say that they are not interested in having you spend that much time on it. So my take on this is that I would put it at the end of your list, and I mean really the end of your priority list, if it stayed there at all. But I understand that your interest is there as well. So I'm going to go over to Rachel, who's got a comment here.
Yeah, thank you. I have zero interest in having any staff time whatsoever spent on this. I mean, yeah. When we get to the right point, I'm going to make a motion to approve the work plan, deleting the aerial study work whatsoever. You know, once the halfpenny was first passed, there was a lot of excitement about trying to connect the areas. And we went out for a request for proposals that was very expensive and spent hundreds of thousands of dollars and got back a lot of plans we could not even begin to afford. And you know, one of them included a monorail up to Snowmass, and the other was a BRT that went up through Owl Creek. And the neighbors of Owl Creek and Snowmass Village residents rejected that. They wanted to be able to drive Owl Creek Road, not have to take a bus on that shortened route and abandon Brush Creek. But so, I mean, I just feel like, I know it's old history and technologies have changed, but we've been through the exercise before, and we came back down to buses, and I just haven't heard from any of our given elected bodies people saying they want to study this. I've heard it for 10 years from Tony Kronberg, but I haven't heard it from any elected officials. So I just don't, I mean, unless we're going to get David an assistant and allow all this other work to be the sole focus of David while somebody else chases aerial tramways, I'm not interested in it.
Thank you. So at this time, for other members of EOTC, if there are any members that are in strong support of leaving it on the work plan, please speak up. Other than that, you've heard people saying no, and Rachel is suggesting that she would like to make a motion deleting that. So if there's anybody that is really wanting to hear or express their side for that work to be done, please do it now. Skippy, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not in strong support of it, but you know, as I said before, I am curious whether it's this year or another year to look at a variety of opportunities, this included. So, at some point.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and that's kind of what I was asking George about. Is that I think everybody is interested in that connectivity idea for sure. It just seems like the aerial connection has been looked at. And I think I understand from you, Skippy, is that you're even looking for examples. Like you haven't even necessarily seen some of that past work that's gone on, so even just examples. But but appreciate you clarifying that you're talking about out years and not now. I've got Ward. Go ahead, Ward.
Yeah, first of all, Marky, thank you. We'll miss you. And secondly, about the aerial connection, I'd rather see time spent on a transporter pod connection than on an aerial tram. Thank you.
Thank you, Ward.
Star Trekkies, unite.
Okay.
I would like to make a motion to approve the 2021 EOTC work plan, deleting any study of the aerial connection and adding some emphasis to the Buttermilk Underpass to the extent we're increasing the funding and staying in line for the funding.
I'll second.
Tori?
We have a
hand up.
Yep.
So and David, I appreciate all the work in this packet and the presentations that you've given us. We have a study in this work session, in this work plan, that's about to be approved for the Upper Valley Mobility Enhancement, of which the Buttermilk underpass is included. So I don't see any reason to include anything else regarding the Buttermilk underpass until we get the results back from the enhancement study. And I would not support that motion, Rachel, that included the Buttermilk underpass.
Okay. I can appreciate that, Bob, and I'll consider dropping it out of this, but I am a little concerned when we hear from George Newman that we're at the top of the list for funding for that, for the transportation planning region of the Intermountain Transportation Planning Region. And I hate to see us drop down to the bottom of the list because it's always ones that are ready to go, and we have to fund the vast majority of it out of our own dollars.
Well, then we have the flap grant for that. I mean, we have the Brush Creek Park and Ride, which perhaps qualifies for that, and that is ready to go.
No. It's a different set of money.
A different planning group. I mean, I just said keep an eye on it, Bob. I didn't say bump it up. I just said let's watch and make sure we don't lose the money.
Okay. Let me ask Dave Pezacek, can you just comment there? The suggestion is to add an item for the Buttermilk underpass and moving that project forward in some way. How would that fit into your work plan?
I think that to the extent that it is on the priority list for the IMTPR, I would keep my eye out for funding availability for that project. In terms of my progression, was more in line with what Bob Circus was saying, is that we would analyze it as a part of the larger study. I don't think that we're losing any grant funding or availability with that time frame. So I'm looking at, with all of these studies, my goal is to have them complete by June 1 to be able to bring to you by the end of July. So I think that the time frame is pretty quick. I don't think that we're necessarily missing out on any grant opportunities that I'm aware of at this time.
Okay. I will delete this section of my motion, amend my motion to remove any reference to Buttermilk.
Thank you.
I'll accept that as a seconder.
Thank you. The motion's been amended and the seconder agrees. So it is a motion for approval of the work plan, eliminating the aerial connection technology survey, but the rest stays. David, did you have more presentation that you want to share with us on this?
We do need to look at meeting dates for next year, and those are technically
No, I just meant on this one item. On this one item.
Yeah, for the work plan, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So the meeting dates are actually part of the work plan.
Okay.
And I can run through those here real quick if everybody can remember that motion.
Okay.
Okay. Get my cursor here. So we are looking at the same rotation of meetings next year, looking at March 25th, July 29th, and October 28th. We do need to decide on the schedule for next year. With the same location, I guess if COVID-19 is still in full force, would be more of a host in terms of Snowmass Village, then Pickens County, then City of Aspen. And then the topics for each of those meetings, March 25th is looking to focus on the IGA update. With July 29th, as I mentioned before, ideally being a culmination of and a staff recommendation from the studies that would be underway, so including the IMS Upper Valley Transit Enhancement Study, and if included, the aerial connection. If it's not included, that wouldn't be as part of this. And then we would bring those back to you for the development of ideally some sort of capital program from those results that we can then tie into the 2022 budget and work plan as we develop those moving forward. I did right now, I haven't heard of any conflicts with these dates. I did check CML and all of the other conferences that I could think of, and I didn't see any issues there. But it looks like July 29th is on a fifth week of the month. The other ones are on 4th weeks of the month. I do understand that that week is your opportunity as elected officials to oftentimes get out of town. So I wanted to put that out there.
Actually, David, that at least looking at my calendar, it's not a 5th week.
Oh, really? Okay.
It has 5 weeks, but we only count it if it's a 5th Monday and Tuesday.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Tori?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Right now it interferes with Northwest COG meetings, 2 out of those 3. But if COVID's still in effect, I'll just deal with it when we know what the meeting schedule is going to be. Because right now we're just doing remote meetings with Northwest COG. But if that changes, we'll have to revisit, because that would be at least Alyssa, when she's back on the board, and I going to Northwest COG meetings, and hopefully a representative from the city of Aspen. So we can just follow through with that when we see what's happening with the virus.
Okay. That sounds good. Okay, so those dates are accepted at this time, knowing that there's potential conflict there with Northwest COG. So I've got a motion and a second to approve the EOTC 2020 work plan with the elimination of the aerial connection technology survey from a staff level. I'll go ahead and I've got comment here. Ward?
I would like to see we have an option of a virtual meeting, even if we get to the end of COVID-19, so that we can join in from wherever we are. I think it's proved to be useful, and as we move forward, I think I'd love to see this left as an option.
Duly noted. Thank you, Ward. We can go ahead. This will have to come back to you, of course, but we'll go ahead and go jurisdiction by jurisdiction. I'll start once again with Snowmass Village. Those in favor of the motion, I'll say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Pitkin County, all those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? And City of Aspen, all those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Any opposed? All right. There you go, David.
Thank you all. That is everything I have for this evening. I did want to recognize George and Marky. Believe this will be your last EOTC meetings. And you want to thank you all for your commitment and everything that you've contributed to the committee.
Thank you very much, Dave.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely, and not just this committee, but I mean, the work that you guys have done over the years, I mean, unbelievable, and this whole valley is definitely a better place for the service that you both have done. So thank you, and thank you.
Thank you, Tori.
Thank you, George, and I'll miss you at Coors and Rafa.
We did have, at the end of this agenda, we did have just updates and information only, but David, this is where I just wanted to bring up just 2 small points. Brush Creek Park and Ride. Recently, we've seen either requests for different uses or different uses. I refer to even the homeless establishment that's there now. But also, we had some requests that I shared with you from people that are talking about leaving work vehicles and the like. And I don't really want to have a longer discussion about that right now, but I just want to know, how does that consideration move forward? And I guess the reason I even bring it up is just times have changed. I mean, things are a little bit different. And, EOTC was very unified in their voice against long-term parking, but you have people that are asking for some of that. Councilmember Ward is saying even about tapping into that for longer-term vehicle storage, perhaps, or How do we start having more conversation there, or if people are interested in more conversation there?
So to step back a little bit, so we did, if you recall, discuss this at the April 30th meeting this last year, and it was identified as something that we want to keep on the radar, but wasn't of a priority to start moving on immediately. But you're right, things have continued to evolve. Some of the feedback that we have received, and thank you for sending those emails along to me and keeping me in the loop on what's going on that you're seeing. But the rules have not changed out at Brush Creek within any time frame, certainly that since I've been on board here. It sounds like there might be, based on our April 30th meeting, it sounded like there might be some interest in considering longer-term parking, but it needed to be within bounds in order to control things like camping and other issues that can present themselves out there. Because we need to still maintain that facility as being safe for commuters. So that's still its primary function. So I think that we can continue to have this conversation. You just adopted the work plan, and it wasn't a component in it. I think that we can continue to look at that, say, in 2022. Hopefully that's not too far out. If that is too far out, I can try to put some effort into it before the July meeting, if you'd like, to see at that point whether you'd like to move forward with a more formal recommendation to allow long-term parking there. So I think those are kind of our options right now.
Okay, well, hold that thought for 1 second then, because that dovetails into the next thing, is that several members tonight talked about the Brush Creek Park and Ride, whether it's underground parking or remote parking, and then the future of parking, whether it's commuters or visitors. Several members mentioned that tonight, so I just, for the rest of the board here, is that something that we want to start looking at, or we wait till next year, and the like? I've got hands up. I'm going to go to Rachel and then Steve.
You know, Tori and all, I think it would just be good to perhaps have in hand, and it may be something David already has in hand, what are the current conditions out there? And, you know, I don't want to add something to David's pretty fleshed out workload for next year, but perhaps we can work with John Kruger. We don't want to step on any toes or cross any lines here, but just kind of seeing how does CDOT view it now, and is there any process to pursue future changes, you know, in particularly adding more spaces and capacity. But I think just kind of finding some groundwork of what it would take to potentially change through CDOT any of their restrictions and what their restrictions are. That's really the key to it. They own the lot. And, you know, perhaps in the future they'd want to sell it, get a little money back in, and then we could use the airspace or the underground space, or maybe they would allow us to do that now. But I just don't know, and it's obviously really big ticket items. I don't know if storage would push us into needing to pay more of the existing surface already, or what that level of demand would be, but it would be nice to know what CDOT will let us do with that or not do with that. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Thank you. Steve?
Yeah, thank you. I would like to do more of a comprehensive look at all of the park and rides in the Roaring Fork Valley in conjunction with RAPTA. RAPTA owns some or all of them, I don't know, but you know, if we look at what we do at the Buttermilk parking lot, Brush Creek Park and Ride, and then all the different ones down the valley are, you know, an essential component of people not bringing their cars up to Aspen. And to me, they also would be a place that you could do long-term parking to catch the Mustang bus to Denver Grand Junction, to ride the RAPTA bus up to the airport, to go on a flight out of the airport. So there's a lot bigger kind kind of scope of things that we could look at. And I think maybe in 2022, that could become part of the work plan to maybe take that bigger look at all of the parking up and down the valley in one bigger study. People could be thinking about it right now without having to decide to do anything.
I'm going to add one more piece to that too. Just thinking about the time frame for the development of the flap improvements out at Brush Creek, it's most likely that those improvements would be under construction in 2022. So we wouldn't want to implement any long-term parking or implement any programs like this until after that construction is complete, because we don't want it going on at the same time that the whole lot is torn up for that project. So I think that evaluating it in 2022 for possibly a 2023 implementation does make sense from that time frame.
Thank you. Ward?
I think George may have had his hand up before for mine. I don't want to step on his toes.
No, I keep on hitting that by mistake. So go
okay.
ahead.
I appreciate the EOTC considering this for what I have been thinking about for satellite parking for workforce housing. I think that the increased needs for this are down the road for Aspen or their developments at BG2 and the lumberyard. We're looking at a break ground in 2024. So including this in a 2022 work plan, I think is appropriate. I would ask the rest of the EOTC members to think of any creative solutions for any spots that we could have any satellite parking for workforce housing to relieve the stress that those workforce housing developments put on surrounding areas for overflow parking. But 2022 is just fine with me for looking at it on a work plan. Thank you.
All right. Okay, EOTC, you have your homework. Bill Madsen.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank the EOTC for supporting the Snowmass Transportation Center. It's been on the docket for a long time, and it looks like it's coming to fruition. So I'd just like to thank you for that. And so hopefully we can and get the no-ride fare from Aspen Snowmass into the plan in the future, so we can continue to see funds for projects rather.
Thank you, Billy. I think we caught most of that.
Tori,
A
actually,
little broken.
Sorry to interrupt, but we didn't actually catch any of that. And if George,
but his thanks was for the Snowmass Transit Center and the allocation of the free bus to RAFTA and utilizing EOTC funds for other EOTC endeavors. Thank you, Bill. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of our agenda this evening. David, did you need anything else from us?
I think I'm all set. Thank you.
All right. I guess I can just call for adjournment then. And once again, Marky and George, thank you, of course. Thank you so much.
I'll make a motion that we adjourn.
There's a motion and a second. Instead of jurisdictions, why don't we just all those in favor say aye?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right.
Thank you.
We're adjourned. Thank you, guys.
Thanks again, George and Mark.
Thank you, everybody.
Guys, bye, Marky. Bye, George.
Ciao, y'all.